Hi, I'm Kathy from Stitch It Together, and today I want to talk about how to use the new endpoint adjustment when you're in gold borders and corners. So I'm going to start sharing my screen with you. I've already set up some things inside of QCT right here, where I have created a scenario where this is a corner, this is the border, and here, 1, 2, 3 is another corner. But just to point out that inside of golden borders and corners, you have a corner setting, and you could have had a block where instead of having a three-piece corner right here, it would just be a block, and you also have none. So the scenario that I want to talk about is when you have already stitched this, your top border and your bottom border, and then you take your quilt off the frame and you turn it. So, because most of the time, because of this feature right here, the join feature, you're not going to have ends to join. But if you did have something like this, where you didn't have them joined and they did not meet up, you would probably need to use endpoint adjustment then for your top and your bottom border. But most of us use the sets, and we will use this join function, and you'll probably not have a reason to use the endpoint adjustment on your top and your bottom border. You would just need to be able to use it when you've turned your quilt. And so you would have something like this. So when you would want to use endpoint adjustment is when you've turned this quilt and you need to marry or join the portion that is already quilted right here and already quilted right here to this section right here. Now, you don't have to use this if you don't want to, and a lot of people don't. So if you don't feel pressured that if you're using gold borders and corners that you have to use this function. But if you want to, if you have a desire to use this, this is how the new system works. So what's new in the new feature is that whereas before, when you were going to join these sections to the already quilted section, you would often end up with it would just join from this end to where the new end is with a straight line. And it would just go from that endpoint to the other endpoint, wherever you designate that target. I'm going to call it a target. And it would be right from the end to the new end. But with the new QCT, with the new endpoint adjustment, you have two options. You can move this pattern. Note to this, you're moving the pattern, you can only move it in one direction. This is not the same thing as stretching it out from end to end. If you need to do that with your pattern, you would want to use your margins, set margins, and you would want to set your custom margins right here, because that is not this. So if you needed to move it just in one direction, over, up, or down, you can do that. But again, it's only on one end. The other thing that is new that you can do is that you can now adjust from where, which is called the anchor point, from where the stitching is going to change its path to meet your target. So those are the two new things in the new endpoint adjustment. So a note, I'm going to do some things that help me. You don't have to do this, but here's some things that I use when I'm going to be using endpoint adjustment. I use the marking tool. So I'm going to make 4 marks here. First, I'm going to show myself where is my border. Um, so I'm going to add right here. There's the top border. I'm going to add a new mark. And it doesn't really matter what I call it, but you do have to name it before you use it. I'm going to add a new mark, my bottom mark right here. And then I'm going to add 2 other marks. Might call it left. And so I want to, particularly in simulation mode, I want to put a mark where my target is. Where am I going? So I'm just going to add that dot, and let's just say the other one is right here. So I'm going to add another one. Might call that right. I'm going to add that one so that I know where I'm going. I have a visual on my screen as to where I'm going. So I'm going to say okay. And so with all of that added, I'm going to just go ahead and sew. Going to the next screen. Oops, I didn't place my border. Let me just do that really quick. And in another word, if about your marking tool, you can't use the marking tool when you go to the next screen, and nor can you use your change your margins or your wherever you want your endpoints to be. So you would have to come back to this screen, and that's okay. You can do that, but just know that you have to do it in this screen. You can't do it in the next screens. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to get to the next screen. There's an order of operations when you're using all these different functions. And the things that you're going to want to change first are your settings and if there's anything to optimize. Then you would want to go to plugins. And even though the marking tool is here, you can't use it. Always use your fabric compensation. I say that wholeheartedly. I'm a big believer in the fabric compensation. You would want to use that next, but this isn't a video on that. So I'm going to skip right to endpoint adjust. So I am going to get into the screen. And I want to go over now these selections right through here. There are a bunch of new things that have happened in this screen. And one of them is this symbol right here. This is your anchor point. And another thing that has changed is that whereas before in all of our other screens of QCT, when I touched on my screen, the little triangle for the needle would have moved, but that's not the case in this screen anymore. Whenever I touch anything or I touch my touchpad, you're going to see that it's the anchor point that moves. In order to move or simulate my sewing machine, I have to use the right click button. So if I move, just tap, the anchor moves, but if I right click, now I get my arrow. So in this screen, if you're at your frame, you don't need to worry about right clicking because you would move your sewing machine, your needle, to where you want to go. But here, you're going to, in simulation mode, you do need to use your right click to simulate moving your sewing machine. So just take note of that. So let me go through all of these things right here. We have selected line. In virtual long arm, which is not this, you would probably have more lines. And I would see maybe sometimes you might have a border where you have more than one line, but most of the time in gold borders and corners, you're only going to have one line here. So you're probably not going to have to use that. But what you will have is every single line you have has an endpoint. And that's what this is indicating right here. It's telling you which endpoint you're working with because you can only work with one at a time. So right now it's working with the green end. If I click on it, now we're working with a red end, and so it would be on this end. You also have your reverse, so I can reverse it. So now my stop would be here, and my start would be here. So that's what that does. You also have reset. You're going to unfortunately probably use reset an awful lot because what you don't see up here or anywhere on the screen is an undo, which I'm hoping maybe they'll create that for us because we really need an undo. So you may be using reset a lot. That's how but you're going to have to reset each time. When you reset, so if you've set one side and you have to use reset, you're going to have to go back to do both sides. But that's what that does. You also have this button right here. It says unstitched. And for the most part, in gold borders and corners, you're probably not going to have to worry about this unless you have more than one line, because this will tell you which line you have stitched and which you haven't. If you were to have more than one line, you would only fix and sew out one line at a time, and it would automatically come back to the screen for you to do the next line. But for the most part, you're not going to have to deal with your lines in gold borders and corners unless you had breaks, unless you had more than one line. I don't see that happening very often. But what you are going to be using all the time is you're going to need to select which end you're working. That's what this does. This is telling you which end you're working. Then you're going to have to turn on or turn off your anchor point. This is one of the things that is new. So your anchor point is the point at which the stitching can be altered. So if I need to go from this point, let's just change it for a second. If I needed to go from this point to here, in the old QCT, it would just draw a straight line from there, and I wouldn't be able to choose from where I would want the stitching to change. So if I tap on my screen now where that arrow is, the anchor point comes. And so now the stitching is going to change from that point. And then if I were to right click right here where I want it to go, let's just see what happens. You'll see that now it has moved from this point. The stitching changed from this point to that point. You also have something new in here where we can move the pattern. Now you only get one bite at the apple with this, so to speak. And it will work in unexpected ways. So even though I have fixed this point to where I want it to go right now, if I were to choose to move this point from here to here, just move the whole pattern, I would have to then redo this point. But I want to show you how you would move a pattern. So I would need to select the correct endpoint. So now I'm working with this endpoint, and then I would want to turn the anchor off. So then I would bring my sewing machine, and in simulation, again, it's right click to right here. Notice that the anchor point has disappeared. We don't have an anchor point anymore because we don't need one. We're going to physically move the pattern. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say snap, and it has moved my pattern to that spot to where the sewing machine needle is. But again, notice that right here, it did move. So I would either have to reset and start over. So if I move to this endpoint, maybe I would be able to do this now. Let's just see. I'm curious. So I'm going to turn off. So I have my anchor point again. And if I tap, let's say I want it to change from, let's say right there. And then if I were to bring my sewing machine right here, curious as to if it's going to work or not. And I say snap, it did. It did in fact move. So that's nice to know. But so when you are ready to sew, you're just going to say confirm, and you would be right back in the screen, and you would just go ahead, do so, and that would get you going again. So I hope that explains what endpoint adjust does. There can be a lot of times where I can think that it would be very helpful to use, but you don't have to use it. So don't feel pressed to use it if you don't need it. Thanks for watching.